Iran should be rich, not comfortable rich, not doing fine rich. I mean obscene, gravity-defying rich. Fourth largest oil reserves on Earth. One of the largest natural gas reserves. 85 million people. A deep, literate civilization with engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and a location so strategic it might as well be a toll booth for the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz sits right there, a narrow artery through which a huge share of the world's oil trade has to squeeze. On paper, Iran is built for prosperity. In reality, Iran has spent the last 4.5 decades watching its currency collapse, its economy isolate, its middle class shrink, and its best talent leak out like air from a punctured tire. That gap between potential and outcome is not a mystery. It is a sequence, a chain of choices that turned a country with extraordinary advantages into a country living under permanent economic emergency. And it starts with 1 year that rewired everything. This is the story of how a revolution that promised justice and dignity built an economic system that struggles to breathe. And it is also a reminder that economies do not collapse from one single cause. They collapse from stacked constraints, each one reducing options until the only thing left is survival. Here is the roadmap. 1. Iran before the revolution, the part everyone oversimplifies. 2. What revolutions do to capital, confidence, and competence. 3. The hostage crisis and the birth of isolation. 4. The war that militarized the economy. 5. The sanctions trap and the strange incentives it creates. 6. Why the system keeps producing the same outcomes no matter who wins elections. Let's set the scene. Iran in the 1970s is not a democracy. The Shah rules as an autocrat. Political freedom is limited. State security is feared. Wealth is uneven. Resentment is real. But economically, Iran is modernizing fast. Oil revenue surges. The state pours money into infrastructure, education, industrial projects, and urban development. Tehran becomes a symbol of speed. A growing middle class emerges. Universities expand. Social life looks increasingly global. It is a country moving forward with its foot on the accelerator and its hands tied behind its back politically. That contradiction matters, because when people later reduce the revolution to one sentence, they usually pick the wrong one. It was not simply a poor country rising up. It was a rapidly changing country with a political system that could not absorb the tension of change. Modernization creates winners and losers. It disrupts traditions. It concentrates wealth in new places. It makes inequality visible. It creates expectations. And when expectations rise faster than legitimacy, pressure builds. In Iran, you had multiple groups with different grievances pointing at the same target. Religious leaders angry at secularization. Students and intellectuals angry at repression. Workers angry at inequality. Nationalists angry at foreign influence. Urban poor angry at being left behind. They did not agree on the future. They agreed on removing the present. That is how revolutions win. And it is also how revolutions create the first economic shock. Because revolutions do not just change leadership. They change the risk calculation of everyone watching. Investors, engineers, traders, doctors, business owners. They all ask the same question. Will my property be safe? Will my contracts be enforced? Will I be able to plan? And in a revolution, the honest answer is usually no. This is step 2. Confidence collapses before GDP does. When protests intensify and the old order wobbles, capital runs first. Money is cowardly. It can be patriotic in speeches, but in markets it is allergic to uncertainty. Businesses delay investments. Foreign firms pause operations. Wealthy families move assets abroad. Skilled professionals quietly line up exit options. Then the new regime arrives, and the economic message becomes even more important than the political message. Is this a system that protects private activity or replaces it? Is it open to global finance or hostile to it? Does it want trade or self-sufficiency? In Iran, the revolution produces a new state built around ideology. That ideology is not just religious. It is also anti-imperial and suspicious of foreign dependence, and that shapes policy. Nationalization increases. Revolutionary institutions grow. New power centers form. Informal networks matter more than formal rules. And in the early phase, disorder is not a bug. It is a feature. The revolution is purging, consolidating, securing. That is a terrible environment for a modern economy, because modern economies run on boring things: predictable law, stable money, reliable banking, trust that tomorrow will look enough like today to justify long-term plans. Iran loses that stability quickly. Then comes the event that hardens the split between Iran and the West into something structural: the embassy hostage crisis. Whatever the internal logic was inside Iran, externally it signals something brutal. This is not a state trying to normalize. This is a state willing to burn bridges. The economic consequence is immediate. Assets are frozen. Financial channels narrow. Trust evaporates. And from that point forward, Iran's economy is trying to run with one lung. Because the world economy is not just trade, it is finance. You can have oil and gas, but if you cannot use normal banking rails, you will sell at discounts, buy at premiums, and waste time and money moving around obstacles. That is step 3. Isolation has a compounding interest rate. Then the next shock arrives, and it is the kind of shock that permanently changes what a country's economy is built to do. War. Iraq invades in 1980. The conflict lasts 8 years. It consumes a generation. It destroys infrastructure. It diverts spending. It prioritizes survival over development. It hardens the regime and expands the role of security institutions. War economies do not reward efficiency. They reward control. They reward logistics. They reward loyalty. And when a war economy lasts long enough, it leaves behind a new set of powerful actors who do not want to go back to normal, because normal would reduce their influence. This is step 4. The economy becomes militarized. You get networks that control ports, construction, procurement, import channels, and strategic industries. You get parallel institutions that operate with opaque budgets and limited accountability. You get a black market that thrives because formal markets are constrained. And here is the ugly paradox. Sanctions and isolation can strengthen the very groups that claim to resist them. Because when legal trade becomes difficult, smuggling becomes profitable. When official import channels are blocked, intermediaries become kings. When currency is unstable, arbitrage becomes a career. The system starts rewarding people who can navigate scarcity, not people who can build abundance. That is step 5, the sanctions trap. Most people talk about sanctions as punishment, but the deeper impact is incentive design. Sanctions do not just shrink the pie, they change who gets the slices. If a country is cut off from normal banking, a small number of actors who can bypass restrictions gain disproportionate power. They become gatekeepers. They take fees, control access, and grow rich in the shadows. Meanwhile, ordinary businesses suffer. Entrepreneurs struggle to import inputs. Manufacturers cannot upgrade machinery. Exporters lose customers. Inflation rises because the currency weakens and imports get expensive. Young people see fewer opportunities. And because oil is still there, the state can often keep going without reforming. Oil becomes a painkiller. It prevents immediate collapse, but also delays structural change. Then Iran cycles through political phases. You get presidents and factions promising reform. You get moments of optimism when negotiations soften tensions. You get moments of hardline retrenchment when external pressure rises or internal politics tighten. And the result is often the same pattern: temporary relief, then reversal. Which brings us to the nuclear deal era and what it reveals. When sanctions ease, oil exports increase, trade improves, and the economy breathes. Then, when sanctions return, the economy tightens again. That swing tells you something important. External constraints matter a lot, but it also reveals the other side. When relief arrives, Iran still struggles to convert it into durable growth because internal institutions are not built for openness. Rule of law is uneven. Property rights feel insecure to many investors. Large, opaque entities dominate key sectors. Competition is limited. Subsidies distort prices. Corruption thrives in systems where access matters more than productivity. This is step 6, a trapped state. Iran's government uses subsidies to manage social pressure. Cheap energy, cheap bread, controlled prices. It keeps people afloat. It also drains the budget and encourages waste. Cheap fuel encourages overconsumption. Controlled prices encourage shortages. Subsidies crowd out investment, but removing them risks unrest. So the state stays stuck in a cycle of buying stability with long-term damage. Now, add demographics. Iran is young. Young populations demand jobs, mobility, and a future that feels open. But the economy is constrained. The currency is weak, and opportunity is filtered through politics. So, the most ambitious do what ambitious people always do. They move. Brain drain becomes a silent tax. It is not just the loss of individuals. It is the loss of networks, startups, research, and compounding human capital. Over decades, that becomes an economic fracture. And if you want a single symbol of what went wrong, look at the currency. A weak currency is not just an inconvenience. It is a summary of trust. When a currency loses value year after year, it tells you the system cannot credibly protect purchasing power. It tells you people prefer hard assets, dollars, gold, property, anything but local money. That preference becomes self-fulfilling. Demand for foreign currency rises. The local currency falls. Imports become more expensive. Inflation rises. Wages lag. The middle class feels squeezed. Now layer on environmental stress. Water mismanagement, depleted rivers, drying lakes. This is what happens when long-term planning is sacrificed to short-term political survival. A country can survive bad years. It struggles to survive a bad structure. So what is the conclusion? Did the revolution destroy Iran's economy? It created the institutional conditions that made destruction likely. It replaced a flawed modernization with an ideological state that prioritized control and resistance. It triggered capital flight and brain drain. It opened the door to international isolation. Then the hostage crisis locked that door. Then war militarized the economy. Then sanctions and corruption hardened the incentives. Then cycles of reform failed to change the structure, because the structure is protected by the groups that benefit from it. Iran did not become poor because it lacked resources. It became constrained because it built an economic model that turns resources into survival rather than growth. And that is the tragedy. Iran could have been a regional powerhouse through industry, trade, and technology, a bridge between markets, a magnet for investment, a hub of education and innovation. Instead, it became a country where potential is constantly converted into pressure, a country rich in geology and poor in optionality. And here is the last uncomfortable truth. This story is not only about Iran, it is about what happens when ideology becomes more important than incentives, when institutions serve loyalty instead of productivity, and when isolation becomes a strategy rather than a temporary condition. Economies do not care why you are isolated. They only care that you are. If you want more stories like this, where we trace the paper trail of power and money and see how systems crush potential, subscribe to The Paper Fortress. Because history is not just what happened, it is what is still happening, just wearing different clothes.